Welcome to Activist MMT, a podcast about real-world economics, including modern money theory, and how life changes when you discover it. I'm your host, Jeff Epstein. So we spent the whole past, basically hour, I appreciate you kind of helping me get my kind of out there analogies, but in a way that was kind of how I'm like mapping, these concepts to my actual life. So I appreciate you working through that. That was interesting. How about we start on, you've just published a book, you're working on a second book, and you're teaching at least two courses, one at Torrens, one at wherever else. So you're extremely busy. That's only a part of what you're doing. So why don't we start off by your two books? So the one you just released, the title skips my mind at the moment, MMT something. And then can you just briefly like compare the purpose or the content of both of those books?
Yeah. Okay, so I published, or Springer published a book in April, which is an introduction to MMT. It's called Modern Money Theory, A Simple Guide to the Monetary System. And Springer has this book series, which is called Professional Practice in Governance and Public Organizations. So they wanted a book about MMT where there are no balance sheets and where I explain major concepts of MMT and also sectoral balances and other economic concepts that are connected to the, let me say, core of MMT, which is about the accounting of money flows. And it was supposed to be reasonably short, so I think it has roughly 150 pages. And I also go into the question of policies. So how do we achieve price stability? How do we achieve full employment? And also how do we maybe get a Green New Deal? I think one of the new things that I did there is I talked about this idea of an economic bill of rights. So the economic bill of rights originally was from Roosevelt in 1944, and it was supposed to amend the original bill of rights. And the idea was to create some kind of rights, which then the government is kind of using to make sure that everybody has a decent job, everybody has a nice place to live that is not too expensive, also that everybody has healthcare, and a couple of other things. So back in 1944-45, the idea was freedom from fear. Okay, so now we go back to human nature. So I think human beings are best when they're not afraid of anything. Okay, this is normally where we are brilliant human beings, if we're not scared of anything. So then we are happy, we are relaxed, we're not violent, we're happy and willing to help others. So what can the government do to make sure that people are not afraid to healthcare, to be poor when you're old, to be discriminated against in all kinds of forms? So that is something which I think is worth looking at, so that you can say, well, we make sure, or the government ensures that everybody in this community does not have to live in fear, which will create more social cohesion, which will be good because we will not be shouting at each other and maybe carry guns openly and this kind of thing. But instead, we all have a nice life and we're not afraid of the future. And that gives us more ease. And as I said, human beings behave better when this is the case. There has been a famous experiment. I think it was Frans de Waal, a Dutch biologist. He gave some monkeys I think grapes when they returned a tool to him. So he kind of accidentally forgot a tool, or he dropped a tool into the cage of these monkeys, and then he asked them with signs by his hand, like, can you bring me back my tool? And then there were 2 monkeys, and he gave them, I think, 3 grapes for bringing back their tool, and the monkeys were perfectly happy with that. And then at some point he decided that he wanted to give three grapes to one monkey, and the other one got 3 pieces of another kind of vegetable, or a piece of vegetable, which was not so good as a grape. So the monkeys like grapes quite a lot. And when the first monkey got the 3 grapes, everything was fine. But then he paid the second monkey for the same task, this vegetable, 3 pieces of that vegetable. And the monkeys completely went crazy. They threw the vegetable back at the experimenter. And also the first monkey started to jump around and cry and shout and kind of behave in an aggressive way. So when you have inequality in a society, so when some people get more than other people, then of course these kind of microaggressions, you could call them, they happen. It's because of human nature. We have the sense of social justice. It is ingrained. Ask any psychologist, they will all say, well, yeah, look at children, look at babies. They all have the sense of justice, of social justice. And if there's individuals who are breaking these kind of rules, then human beings are also able to be very bad, punishing other human beings. Okay, so sadly enough, we have 2 major wars going on. So we can see that this kind of behavior is still in us. Okay, it's still possible to bring out the worst in us. And normally we should have a government that says, look, we want to have peace inside our own country, and also we want to have peace with other countries. And let's try to find these kind of policies that bring us peace. Historically, liberalism was the answer to this kind of question. But liberalism has lost its way. So they kind of said, well, we use economics now to forget about society completely. Everything now is about the individual, and peace is taken for granted. We don't have to do anything about it. Democracy is taken for granted. Inequality, with Elon Musk owning Twitter, will not have any effect on anything. It's outside of the paradigm. But it's not outside of the paradigm, clearly. I mean, it's these things that we have seen over the last couple of decades. That they've been getting worse and worse, and these kind of facts that we have seen, climate change, rise in inequality, they've turned into problems. And we cannot live as societies in a democratic world. We cannot live with further increases in inequality. We can also not live with further increases in climate change. It will threaten the survival of mankind if we continue the way we're living right now. And yeah, I think I'll just stop there, because I think that was me talking about the book and talking about this idea of having a bill of economic rights to move into the right kind of direction. Yeah.
So that is a part that is featured in your book, in the MMT book?
That's a little bit more comprehensive, but yeah, this is...
But the basic concept?
Yeah.
Okay. You said it has no balance sheets. They wanted you to not have any balance sheets. How do you... I mean, clearly balance sheets are a very important part of it. So how did you get around that?
Well, there's this one paper about the monetary system of Virginia in the 1760s. I think it's Farley Grubb who is the author, historian from the US. And he describes a system where they have a paper currency, which they just print. So the major concepts of MMT you can easily explain in this system, where they want to build maybe a bridge, or I think in the book I use the example of the mayor of a town in Virginia who wants to build a school and a road and then hire 2 teachers. So how do we do that? And then I'm making the mayor ask questions to his citizens, like how do we get the resources? And then they come up with this idea, which is historically correct, that you tax people. It was a poll tax in reality. I think I'd use a HUD tax as a simplification in my book. Being open about that. So you just tax people and say, okay, you pay, I don't know, $50 Virginia per year in taxes if you want to have your HUD in the next year as well. How do you get 50 Virginia pounds? Well, if you work for the government for 1 day, you get 1 Virginia pound. So this means the tax equals 50 days of work from the citizen who has to pay taxes. And that's how the government can create, or can get those resources that it needs to create the public goods and services that it wants to create for the public purpose. So some of these fiscal concepts are easy to explain. I can talk about government spending, tax revenue, the fiscal deficit, also the concept of public debt. So every dollar or every Virginia pound that the government issues and spends into the economy increases public debt. Every tax that is paid reduces public debt. So it's just a statistic. It's not that somehow the government would owe something to the people who are holding those paper slips, which are just saying X Virginia pound. So it's very clear that the government cannot run out of Virginia pounds, and it's not really a debt. So the only debt that the Virginia government has is that they have to accept the currency that they issued for tax payments. They could theoretically default on that debt as well, but they have no reason to, because the system works, and historically it has worked. And there's also this extra nice thing that the people in Virginia, when the tax collector came and collected the cash for tax payments, they burned the cash. So this is very easy. So you can say, well, there's just no way logically that the government can somehow have tax payments before the government spend into the economy. Of course, first they have to spend public money, then later they collect it. But also empirically, you can say, well, since they burned the taxes, it's not possible that taxpayers' money finance anything. They just burned it. So I think this is a pretty much waterproof case of saying, look, the way the system works is that the government is not constrained in the way it spends. It just spends. And also in the root of the word revenue, you can see it's from French to come back, revenu. The money comes back, tax revenues, bond revenues. So I'm using everything that I can, except balance sheets, to make those points. And of course, those people who are interested in balance sheets, I point out the literature, like Randy Ray's primer, for example. I think he's working currently on a new edition, which will be the 3rd edition of his primer. So there are, of course, books where you can see the details, but for public servants, probably it's enough to understand this story and to understand that you cannot run out of money. Not every US citizen has to understand the details of the monetary system of the United States. It's just not necessary. It would be too complicated to explain it to everyone. But yeah, it's not necessary. So the short version, I think it's okay to understand how the monetary system works and what the constraints really are, which means that there's only limited amount of resources, and if the government is trying to pull more resources from the private sector, at some point they might have to bid a higher wage or bid a higher price for that, whatever they want to have. So this might lead to inflation. So there you could have different kind of inflation stabilizing policies, like taxing people or taxing the use of certain resources, or using public companies to extract some resources so that you are able to control the flow of resources. So this is where I use this example from Virginia as a central case. And then basically I say in a digital currency world that we live in today, it's the same thing. The government is just creating things, it's just creating monetary units, it's creating balances with the computer. They just create that without any connection to gold or the amount of goods and services created.
Right. I'm actually reading Randy Ray's illustrated book with my 15-year-old right now. And they bring up that example as well of burning and so on.
Yeah.
And actually in the Deficit Myth, Stephanie Kelton's book, sectoral balances is basically balance sheets on a grand scale.
Yeah.
And she describes sector. I don't think she has any balance sheets in there. I don't recall at the moment. But she has the buckets to describe sectoral balances. So that's an example of how to get that concept across of basically balance sheets. It's basically balance sheets on a grand scale. Okay, so I want to compare the other what's in the other book, but before I do that, what I actually see as MMT is, you mentioned something about, this is what humans are. I don't recall exactly what you said, but a huge thing with human beings is that they don't want to say, I don't want to. Whether it's inviting a friend over your house, even if it's a close friend, inviting a friend over your house just to hang out or just to meet or something, come to a performance or go, or even to the extent of healthcare on a macroeconomic scale of providing healthcare for people. People don't want to say, I don't want to. They want to come up with some reason that I can't. When it comes to something negative, what they perceive as negative, they do not want to say, I want to do something negative. I don't want to be with you. You're my friend, but I don't want to be with you. I still like you, but I just don't want to be with you just this one night. I want to do something else. Or I just want to stay home. I just don't want to do something. They don't want to say that. They want to come up with some excuse. I can't.
Yeah.
So, or I'm sick. I have to be family time or whatever. I can't. And the same thing on the other side. They don't want to say, I want to do something bad. I want to cause mass exploitation or cause, what I want to do something selfish. They want to come up with some excuse to say, I must. And MMT gets rid of that possibility. MMT is what demonstrates that everything is a choice, that you can choose to give people healthcare if you want to. You can choose to not give people healthcare if you want to. You can choose to go over your friend's house if you want. You can choose to not go over your friend's house if you want. And it gets rid of the I can't and the I must when it comes to negative stuff. MMT it is a choice. Admit that it's a choice. And since people don't want to admit it's a choice with a lot of these things, that I think is a huge factor of the major resistance that MMT receives, because that eliminates the possibility of saying, I want to do something bad or I don't want to do something desperately needed. So does that make sense to you? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. Especially this excuse for governments that they say, well, we don't have the money for that. It's used by political parties of the left and the right here in Europe when they're in government. So they find it useful to say it. Of course, they should say we don't have the resources for that. And I think that MMT should maybe point that out more often, that yes, there are excuses for a government not to do something. And there are also moral imperatives for governments to do certain policies. Governments are responsible for employment and also for unemployment, therefore. So they should have full employment policies. They are also probably the only institution that can fix price stability and also fix sustainability of the economy. But I think it will take, as you said, it will take a lot of years, because we have been living with this kind of idea that the government doesn't have any money. We've been living with that for a couple of decades already. And economic systems don't change every couple of years. So going from Keynesian policies in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s to monetarism, and then to inflation targeting. We have to go back almost 100 years to see the pre-Keynesian policies and how that worked. And that was kind of neoclassical on steroids in some countries. In other countries, it was already Keynesian policies in the 1930s, like FDR. So these kind of regime changes in economic policy making, and also connected to that, of course, the way that politicians are selling their positions to the public. That, of course, is something which takes a lot of time to achieve, if you want. So MMT has started a process which is a little bit like an avalanche. So it starts in a slow way, and you can see stuff is moving somewhere in the back, and it will be bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think there was this video clip, the president of the Council of Economic Advisors, who said that the US government prints its own money and therefore cannot go bankrupt. So sometimes you have these little things that can change the perceptions. So there you have an official of the US administration, or at least it's an institution that works for the US government, that somebody high ranking says it out loud, that the US government cannot go bankrupt. And also on Twitter, there were a lot of investors on Twitter who were joking about the French government losing all credibility and seeing their bond prices going towards zero, like what happened to Greece about 10 years ago here in Europe. That's not going to happen again. the ECB has said that no, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to buy up Greek bonds to stabilize their prices. So to some extent, we already live in a new world where central banks have kind of assumed this role of, I call it dealer of last resort. So they make sure that there's always a buyer of government bonds. So if bond prices collapse, they will stop the collapse and reduce the prices to the old price. Some central banks have been playing with this. So this is how the British got rid of Liz Truss, because the Bank of England chose not to intervene in the bond market. So bond prices collapsed after she announced her mini budget. And then the collapse in bond prices was kind of sold to the public. Like, look, the financial markets are not going to like this, and we will not be able to sell any more gilts, so UK government bonds, and we will basically go bankrupt. So, of course, this has something to do with politics, and economics should never be seen as something which is somehow apart from politics. So the two belong together. So economics explains reality, but by explaining reality, you also influence reality, which, by the way, is a theory of reflexivity by George Soros, who wrote about this in a couple of books. So this is why economics is always it's so loaded with political stuff, because depending on your political goals, you might pick a certain kind of economist and prefer him or her to other economists who are probably offering a more realist economics, but maybe that's not what you want. So. Yeah.
The ECB won't let French bond prices go to zero for the same reason that the central bank, I mean, it is basically the central bank. It's the same reason that the central bank in the US or anywhere won't let the interest rate go beyond their target. Yeah. And they have to have an interest rate. And if they don't have an interest rate, that just means they have a zero interest rate. But they must manage that interest rate regardless, because if they don't, then that threatens the stability of the entire society, of the financial system. And then if we don't have stability in the financial system, then, we can't trust anything. We can't keep track of anything. We can't know that our money is worth whatever, the contracts are, the financial aspects of contracts. And it's the same thing with the ECB not allowing French bonds going to zero. Yeah. It is, the consequences of that are too great. They're bigger than the ECB, than the governmental body, the European, whatever, the government can handle. They cannot allow that to happen because it is too big for them to handle if it does happen. Allowing the prices to be so unstable would cause societal upheaval. And then that is a consequence that they would not, that would take even more energy to handle. They can handle it by simply manipulating numbers, or they can handle it with military because of uprisings or whatever.
Yeah. No, I mean, one of the mandates of the ECB, secondary mandates, is financial stability. And not buying those government bonds would mean you would create financial instability by letting those bond prices collapse, so that the French savers would go protest and would start to burn things, because they like that in France. So of course, the ECB says, well, it's just we type a couple of numbers on our keyboard and we stop a revolution and an unrest. And I mean, it's only fair because the people who are holding the government bonds, if it's people or banks, it doesn't really matter. But of course, they assume that the nominal value in euros is there. And if you say, well, your government bond, which is nominally 1 million euros, now maybe you will get only 100,000 euros because the French government will go bankrupt and they pay only 10 cents on the euro. That's not going to create a lot of happy voters. So it's one of the essential things that we have in our societies, that the monetary system works in the sense that it does not lead to financial crisis in the government bond market. And I think we have learned that lesson in the global financial crisis, when the Eurozone did not do the correct thing. Instead of saying we support the local governments, so the national governments in the Eurozone, the ECB said, well, it's not really our task to interfere in the bond market. No, of course it's your task. And they have taken over responsibility. So Mario Draghi in 2012 said, we will do whatever it takes to save the euro. And the investors understood that this means that they will be the dealer of last resort. So whenever the private investors want to offload a lot of government bonds, the ECB will be happy to buy them at the market rate so that the price will not be falling. And that's essential because that's how many people carry forward their savings for old age into the future. They hold government bonds. So it's it's very important that this works. Also, government bonds act as collateral sometimes when the banks are dealing with each other and with financial market players. So also from that side. But Stephanie Kelton, she had a very nice presentation at the MMT conference in Leeds in July. And she said maybe it would be a better idea to just abolish government bonds altogether, which would be another option, to just say, okay, so just
abolish them in the sense of that they are needed for, like, there's nothing wrong with bonds themselves. There's something wrong with linking bonds to financial stability.
Yeah, the idea would be to say, okay, if we can do public finance by having the central bank spend money into existence on behalf of the treasury, and then the net amount of new money is absorbed by the issuance of government bonds to stabilize the interest rate. Well, we don't need that anymore because we have now a deposit rate. In the US, it didn't exist before the global financial crisis. So there was really the danger of an oversupply of reserves, so an oversupply of central bank money, creating a movement towards an interest rate of 0 on the interbank market. But if you have balance, if you pay interest on reserves, so I think they call it interest on excess reserves. So if the central bank pays an interest rate on the deposits at the central bank, why then issue government bonds? Doesn't make any sense. For the banks, it doesn't matter whether they have money in an account which says reserves, or they move the money into an account at the Fed which says government bonds, but it's the same interest rate. Technically and functionally, there's nothing wrong with not issuing government bonds. Okay, so you can still decide to pay interest on those funds at the central bank. But also, if you are more MMT minded, Warren Moses' position was always, why should we reward people for not spending money? I mean, those people who are not spending money, probably they are rich. So if you pay interest on reserves, you would reward people who already have more money than they spend. And there's not really a moral case of why you would want to reward that. So we're not living in a world where we need people to save a lot of money because somehow, for example, we don't have the goods and services. No, we do. Most people don't spend more money because their income is rather low and they don't have extra income to spend and they cannot borrow. So that's why they stop spending. But as a society as a whole, we shouldn't be interested in having more saving. That's not a thing that we need. Mostly we have mass unemployment in the US and in other societies. But we don't need these incentives. So having a 0 interest rate policy, and then having basically the central bank buy up all of the government bonds. We already did that with QE. I think in the Eurozone, we had at some point the Euro system owned roughly half of the bonds outstanding. In Japan, it was even higher. I think in the US, it was around 30%. So of course, they can just buy up all those government bonds and then they're all gone. And then we are living in a world where it's very easy for everybody to see when the government spends. They increase the bank account of your bank, and then the bank increases your bank account number. And when you pay your taxes, then you have less money and your bank has less money. And there's no more interbank market probably. Banks can just borrow from the reserve. They have some kind of overdraft. So if we would simplify the monetary system along these lines, it would be the same in functional terms. There would be no change at all. You would not have somehow more inflation or, I don't know, less inequality. So it doesn't really solve any problem, but it creates a clearer monetary system for people to understand. And that would be probably worth thinking about. That's what Stephanie said, and I agree that probably it's a good idea now to argue that we should just get rid of the bond thing altogether. The banks, by the way, also they don't have lower profits. If you pay interest on reserves, the profits for banks are not changing. The question whether you should pay interest on those bonds or on reserves, that's a moral question. It shouldn't be a policy question really, because as Warren Mosler also said quite a lot, the interest rate is not so central. It doesn't really have a big effect on the economy, and if it has, then probably higher interest rates are inflationary. So if you want to have lower inflation, you should put interest rates down, not up.
A reason to have bonds in the fashion that we do is propaganda. because it makes the taxpayer myth feel more real, because we have to get bonds from the market, from the rich, in order to spend. Our law says in lots of countries that we must collect bonds or taxes before spending. And we MMTers happen to look closely at how that actually works, and the excessive unnecessary complication of how that actually works. It is still the government creating money, but but because the bonds exist in the private sector as opposed to the central bank lending to the treasury, you know, basically right pocket to left pocket, the bonds existing in the private sector give the appearance of we have to get money from the rich in order to, from the national government point of view, in order to spend. It perpetuates very successfully the taxpayer myth. So that is a practical purpose of having bonds in the market, which suggests strongly a reason why they don't want it to change.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think it's mostly a political thing, that there's no interest in those who want to protect the status quo, for people to find out how it really works. For example, in the United Kingdom, the Labour government is now talking about moving to the Canadian system of having private pension funds. I'm not sure how it really works in Canada, but normally you would say, well, as the issuer of the currency, the Bank of England can, on behalf of the Treasury in the United Kingdom, they can create any pension payments that the UK government wants to have. So there's really not any problem at all of not having the money. So they need this lie of government bonds and the idea that there's taxpayers' money and also the money that they get through bond sales, that they need this kind of money, and that they need to have the rating agencies give them a AAA or something. These are the myths that they need in order to shift some of the power of government to the private sector, without voters recognizing that this is, of course, shifting power to financial markets, shifting income streams to financial markets. And I mean, we have seen in the last couple of decades, this kind of economic system doesn't work. Okay, so you have a lot of wealth extraction. You're destroying a lot of companies. Pay a lot of money to people who are working quite a lot, but I think for the US the numbers are really devastating. I saw an article on CNBC, and they said that, I think it was in 2020 or 2021 probably, when the markets rebounded, the top 25 hedge fund managers combined earned more than $35 billion. So it was an average of more than $1 billion in annual income. There's no way that this can be justified. What kind of productivity should these people have? It's not possible. And now
they are that much more productive than everybody else. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a big thing. I mean, the people who are producing the value are the people who are working, and the entrepreneurs who are making sure that people can coordinate their plans and work well. They also deserve some kind of income for that. But we still have a lot of rents, and especially when it comes to real estate, when it comes to finance, there's a lot of market power there, where people get lots of money, but they don't put anything, or they don't put that in terms of value into the economy, what they take out. And wages are not as high as they should be. So those are the people who are on the losing side. I mean, the development of economic inequality in the US in the 2000s, that was one of the starkest pictures ever seen, where the gains from economic growth went almost exclusively to the top 10% over a period of 10 years or so. That was really something. So I think Biden was able to turn it around somewhat, so that the lower 90% now see also their income going up in terms of purchasing power in economic times, in good economic times. But probably more is needed even to restore this kind of balance in society, because I think otherwise the people who have lots of money, they will use that money to take over the power from the politicians, indirectly, of course, by donations, by paying for clips for certain parties. But that's, of course, you're losing the essence of democracy, which is one person, one vote, when that happens. And just like those monkeys, at some point the people will just rise up and say, this is not fair, and we don't want to live in the system like this. even though we all are better off than just living alone. So just like
Right. Yeah, I mean, even obviously, once it gets to societal collapse, the rich ain't gonna buy their way out of societal collapse. I mean, maybe buy a few more months than everybody else, or a year more than everybody else. But it all of the bonds, getting rid of bonds, and instead of borrowing from the public, you borrow from the Treasury. The central bank borrows from the Treasury, so it's all within the national government. It's the governmental sector. I never hear a reason for not doing. There's a lot of resistance to that, and it boils down to it gives the appearance of the taxpayer myth, and so we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. We don't want to change that because it helps us keep us in power, because it deceives the people into thinking the taxpayer myth is true. You never hear, I don't want to keep it because of the taxpayer myth. You always hear some reason that we can't do it. We can't do it. We must stay this way because of whatever reasons, inflation or bankrupt or whatever reason there is. There's always we must stay this way. And actually evokes something I learned in John Harvey's course, and I'm pretty sure from his book, Contending Perspectives, of that people will believe whatever it takes to remain part of a group. So there's a sense of preserving one's own power, and there's also a sense of, which is also in a sense also another way of preserving one's power, of you will believe whatever it takes to remain part of a group, and you will believe it passionately. And these two concepts are related. So you're also writing another book, and this was the book that I reviewed 2 years ago at this point, and it had a lot of balance sheets. It was much more detailed and in depth. So can you compare? Summarize this other book and kind of compare, I guess, the audiences or whatever, please.
Okay, so I think in 2019 there was a textbook published by Randy Ray and Bill Mitchell and I think another colleague from Australia. Sorry?
Martin Watts.
Yeah, Martin Watts. Yeah, thanks. I at that moment I had a draft of a macroeconomics textbook on my computer, which was just sitting there. It was basically done, and I always wondered whether I would publish that. And then I thought, okay, now that this textbook has been published by Randy and by Martin and by Bill, I thought, okay, so maybe I won't publish mine. But then they gave me the textbook and said, okay, maybe you can read it and give us a sentence for the back of the book, and I did that. And the book is really, really good. But it's extremely long, so I think it's 600 pages, and I think it's a book that you would give to a master's student or to a PhD student, but it's definitely not a book that you can give to a bachelor student.
Actually, just my understanding, and I don't know this for sure, but my understanding is that it is intended for a 2-semester, I thought undergraduate course, but that's just my memory. But clearly it's an intense book, regardless.
Yeah, it is. So well, my own book was written for a European audience mostly, in sense of macroeconomics. I wanted to have a macroeconomics book. No, wait, I first wrote it for the Eurozone because I was based here. And then I wrote a US version of that with the US dollar, which is not so different. And then I thought, okay, so if I want to have a 1-semester course at the bachelor level, and I don't want to go through all these details that my colleagues offer in their book, so then my book still makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I started during the pandemic in 2020. I spent a lot of time at home with our children, and sometimes they allowed me to work. So I was working along on that book, and I sent it to you. I sent it to Warren Mosler, and got a lot of good comments. And I lost contact with the publisher for a brief moment of a couple of months. And in that interval, Springer approached me about publishing a textbook in German. And that is why this book for the US market has taken so long. So in the meantime, I've published the German-speaking version of that in fall last year.
So the book that we just talked about, the MMT primer, was written in German. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the textbook, the macroeconomics textbook, that has been published in German now, because I translated the text that you have seen. Okay.
Wait. I'm unclear. Your MMT primer that we had just discussed, it was like 130 pages long.
No,
Is
no, the macroeconomics textbook.
the Martin Watts and Mitchell book?
No, my own.
Oh, your own. Okay. Sorry.
Okay, so yeah, the textbook that I wrote with all these balance sheets, there's now a German version of that.
Okay.
And the idea was that I would publish the American version after I'm done with the German version.
Okay.
There's this 80-20 problem that you finish 80% of the work in 20% of the time, and then the last 20% of the work you finish in 80% of the time. So everything took a lot longer. So now my plan is, if possible, I would try to publish the US version. Probably I would publish it in 2026, working on it next year. Yeah, so it just takes a lot of time. And the thing is that the script was written pre-pandemic, and so many things have happened. So many good things in terms also about talking about price stability. We now have also this idea of profit inflation. So I need to revise a couple of chapters significantly. Also, we have a lot of quotes now that we can use in the textbook, or I can use in the textbook, to back up my theories by quotes from practitioners who are saying, yeah, that's how it works actually. So the U.S. government cannot run out of dollars because they print their own. I got this nice quote now. Yeah, but that's the idea. So that book would be a semester-long course for people who have no idea about MMT. So I wouldn't sell it under the label of MMT, because it just explains to students how money is created by the government, by banks, by the central bank, and whether they want to call it MMT or not. I mean, it's just the way that money is created. And historically, we call that macroeconomics. So just as Randy and the others call their book macroeconomics, mine will also go under the name of macroeconomics. And then I hope that it finds an audience so that people are happy with learning about the way that money is created.
Okay, so essentially, your MMT primer is just a very simplified version of your macro book.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not like I had to start writing from scratch. So of course I understand all of the details of the macroeconomic book, the balance sheets and everything. But it's not I wouldn't say it's a boiled down version, because it's just a completely different approach of writing about money, and all these chapters are completely new. So they
Do you have it?
Yeah.
Do you have any other books that are in the works? Obviously, it will be a distant from now, but do you have any other ideas that you're pursuing with books?
Yeah, I do have a lot of ideas, but the problem is I don't have the time. One thing that I would like to write about is the question of value, because I think we need to discuss value more aggressively. So economics always says you put a price to things, and then people buy it and they're happy with it. And if people buy something, then they're happy. But that's simplified. And you end up having lots of people buying sneakers which are white and not really being happy, because they just buy them to be like the others. Okay, so it's a defensive move if you want. It's just trying to stay within the group, to dressing like the others do. But what is it really that you think is of value? And of course, this is a philosophical question. So how do we want to live? And of course, there are the resource constraints in terms of how can we live on this planet and ensure that the other generations that will follow can also use the resources of this planet and can develop their own resources. I just read a paper about the question of what really is a resource, and of course it's not clear from the start that, for example, some kind of rock can be a resource, or that some kind of energy is a resource for us. So all of this is created by our societies, which are extremely complex. So talking about value, I think another big step forward would be to first say, look, this is who we are in terms of human beings. This is human nature, and this means that this is describing the hardware, if you want. And then the question is, what kind of software do you want to run in terms of a political system and economic system on this hardware that we all are as society? So we have discovered that it's really effective to have specialized labor. So we all work in different jobs and we don't consume what we produce. So that's kind of hardwired from the technological side, from the resource side. But then the question is, how do we manage those resources? And we had this example of the lawnmower, which might be a community lawnmower. We talked about public transport a little bit. So the question would be, would that not also be something which we would enjoy, like traveling with others in a train for 5 hours instead of going by car for 8 hours individually? We can have a completely different conversation, and we wouldn't be bound so much by considerations of profits and prices and maybe quantities, but instead think about what we can imagine as a society. And I think that's something that should expand also the audience. So it's really nice that people think about money and think about financial market power. The Bitcoin movement, for example, it builds on this as well. But of course, we could have a much broader audience if we would write about utopias and possibilities for the future of our society. So what is it that we could do with the resources we have that reflects also our values as individuals, but also our values as communities at the same point in time. So I think that's a conversation where we could somehow overcome this 20th century, which had these ideologies like the state solves every problem or the market solves every problem. So the 21st century, in that sense, could be the century where we accept our shortcomings as individuals, we accept our shortcomings as societies and communities, and we create an economic system that fits our human nature without being ideological about it. Just as we talked about having a bike as private property while your neighbor has a bike sharing bike. Okay, so it's okay to have both things. We don't need to choose. We don't need to choose capitalist or, I don't know, I would call it social democratic here in Germany.
We don't need to choose for everybody. We don't need to make a law about it. We allow people to choose. We don't need to choose for them.
Yeah, in Milton Friedman's words, we are free to choose. Okay, so we can use our own arrangements, private property, or we can use this community organized thing. We don't have to say we allow only one and the other one is not allowed. We can have both, and then people just whatever works for those people, for the people, they just pick what they think is right, and then we have these things. And if there is in some sector no private property solution, okay, then it's because the people don't want that. If in some part of your economy there is no community solution, no government solution, well, then it's because people are happy with, I don't know, buying their bread from a private bakery, for example. But then again, it's the people's choice, and I think that is something which probably is a debate worth having, instead of being bogged down in these debates about communism and socialism. And I mean, I just checked the numbers for the US. If the US government would increase spending by 50% permanently, government spending as a share of GDP would still be lower than in France. And France is not a communist country. Okay, so I think we should get away from these ideological debates. I know that they kind of work politically, that people build careers on these extremes and so on. But I think for our societies to flourish, we need to go back to the basics and try to think about our values, and then how we can create laws and economic systems that support our values and bind us together instead of putting us apart, which is what we've seen for the last couple of decades.
Okay, so value. I mean, value is a choice, and when you have financial value, as if that's the only kind of possible value, that's just a choice of those in control of money, that those have the most money are the ones who decide what value is. Yeah. And at my career for this entire calendar year so far, and I sing at senior centers, senior living communities. That's what I do, and it's incredible. It's great fun, and the value of that has very little to do with finance. It has nothing to do with money. You know what? You know, they bring me in because it, you know, for people in what's called memory care, you have memory issues, it triggers the parts of their memories that have not been affected, which wakes them up in a sense, which, you know, brings them back in a sense. that's a very important thing to do. And even for people who are not having memory issues, more just independent people, or people who are mostly independent but need some assistance, entertainment is a very important thing. Not being distracted by 500 channels with streaming everything that you can just there's an extreme, there's a balance. Entertainment is good up to an extent, but not if it takes you to the point where it's distracting you from really important things. And so there is real value in my going in and singing for senior people, whatever their condition happens to be. That is a very important, that is a very valuable thing. And it actually disgusts me. I have to pay taxes, pay my bills. I have to make money at this. And it disgusts me when I have to talk about the money. I say, I feel dirty saying this, but can you afford a little? It went really well, and it's been going really well in the past, whatever. Now that we've booked more, now that we've booked next year, can you afford more? My fee is the best you can do, as long as you're comfortable, as long as your budget can handle it, and as long as I can keep coming back. Is that the best you can do? And I always say, I feel dirty saying this, but this is my livelihood and I must. Can you pay me more? Yeah. And that translation of what is real value, of non-monetary value, non-financial value, and having to put a financial value on it feels disgusting to me, but it's necessary if I'm going to survive. So, it's financial value, I think, is just a choice of who's going to decide what value is. And the market, or the rich, or people who own companies are the ones who decide if you're valuable or not, if you're valuable or not, if you will be a worker or not, and how much you'll be paid, and how many rights you'll have. And it's a value is a choice, and who are we going to allow to make the choice of how valuable something is? And to put a financial value on something is a choice of certain people are going to make that choice, make that decision. And actually, a final point about that is my older son, who just turned 18. He is we have him set the table for dinner. And my wife loves to have a nice looking table, folded napkins with a spoon and a spoon and a knife and a fork on it, and on the left side of the whatever. It's just a nice, with a glass and a plate for everybody, ready to make the table. And my son says, what do we need these folded napkins for? There's no practical value to having these folded napkins. And I was like, you know what? You're right. But there is a practical value, and that is making mommy happy. That's the practical value. Yeah. Let's make mommy happy. Okay? Yeah. That when mommy ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Let's make mommy happy. And that's kind of a struggle with him. If it's not a practical, what I guess what he decides is a practical value, then he doesn't want to do it. We have to fight him to fold the napkins on the table for dinner. So it's anyway, random stuff regarding value. I find that it's a nebulous subject. I haven't really looked into it, but clearly it's a choice. So
yeah, I think it's a good alternative to the idea of having profits. Okay, so I mean, the whole idea of taxpayers' money is that the government can still invest, but only if there's profit in it, in the form of taxes. But if you say, okay, let's not do that, let's not talk about profits, then what are you going to talk about? And public purpose is a nice concept, but I think value is broader, and it allows us to connect with more people. So I like public purpose. I've written about public purpose as well, but I think value is, I mean, it's probably something which we can use in the next couple of decades, to talk about what we want. And I mean, your position could be a public job, right? I mean, somehow your city government or the local government could hire you as a public singer, and then they would send you to whatever centers demand a singer, and then you wouldn't have to negotiate your wage. You would have a nice wage which the government sets, which ensures that you have a nice living wage, and you have health insurance and so on, that you get a pension. I mean, all of this is a political choice, And if we think that it is a value to take care of the elderly and make sure that not only they get fed, but also they get entertained and that they have a good life, I mean, that's a value. It's not really public purpose. Maybe it is, but I think it's more of a value thing. Listening to you talking about it like this, I completely agree. I mean, I think it's a nice idea, and it should be part of the economic debate. And we need to define these kind of terms or get older terms like value and redefine them and use them in order to start a political conversation with the public about what do we want, and not just to talk about what can we afford in terms of money, because that's not really the right kind of framing.
And the very fact that I have to do all of this on my own, I have to work the personalities of all of these directors at all of these facilities that I perform at, shows that someone doesn't find this job valuable. A lot of people do, but not someone that, I'm not making a rich person richer. So they're not going to help me through legislation or through, a central job of doing this. But before we get off, let's just talk kids and music or something just for a few minutes before we say goodbye. So how old are your kids?
Oh, my kids are 7 and 9.
So they're in, like, what grades are they in?
They go to 2nd grade and 4th grade now next year.
Okay. And so we briefly talked about music. Can you? I am curious. I'm putting you under pressure on videos here, but I mentioned to you a couple of, I don't remember how it came up, but like I recommended a couple of kids' musics to you. Did you happen to catch it?
No, I didn't. It's still sitting in my inbox.
Okay. All right, it's all good.
A low priority, yeah.
Okay.
But I found a couple of limericks it's all in German, but talking about music and so on. So there's a couple of limericks for children. They're very funny. I'm sure that this exists in English as well. So our children like it so much that I have to invent my own limericks.
That's cool.
Talking about mostly it's about animals and animals doing things. But that's also something which is a value. I mean, we don't put a lot of monetary value on being creative with your kids, for example, and also on children's education. But it's so important that that the children learn to play with words, that they know how to express themselves, to say what they want, and that's all part of this. And when you read some of these limericks, it's really, really funny. I mean, even the grown-ups are having a laugh about it. And this completely gets lost because, I mean, normally, how would I encounter these kind of limericks? Because it's not on Netflix. It's not. You can look it up on the internet, of course, but it's also part of our values that we should connect also to the techniques, the cultural techniques of the older generations, the creative stuff that they produced. I mean, it's something which we've kind of lost sight. Everything that cannot be digitalized and put on the internet, we kind of lost track of that. And I think that's the whole world to discover. So that could also be part of the value conversation, which is about culture and the way we bond, the way we experience things together. I think that I mean, of course, we can all go to the Taylor Swift concert and experience things together. But I mean, it's incredibly boring that so many people go there. I mean, she's a great singer and everything. But there must be other ways for people to bond and to experience things, and like hiking, for example, or going with a bike somewhere on a trip. And I think that also here the government can help us achieve a better quality of life. So because as I said, we just copy each other. So if people start going to the Taylor Swift concerts, everybody's going to go there, and then we tell everybody else that we just went there, and that's the whole message. But we didn't experience anything individual. Everybody has the same experience. So I think this is probably not really increasing happiness. I mean, I wonder what people will think in 10 years of going to these concerts. And just saying, well, it's free choice. I don't think it's free choice. I mean, in that sense, because we are part of social constructs, we see advertisements for these concerts. We see advertisements for the music. It's not so clear cut. And I think there's a lot of things that the government could do to enhance the profile of other cultural activities that we are kind of ignoring right now.
Well, I mean, even kids' music. You know, when I my boys are 15 and 18 now, and you know, I felt the pressure of early on of, you know, what do you call it? There are kid music groups. I can't think of their names, but there's like an Australian group, and they're just like exclusively kid music groups or artists. And it's like they're very popular, but I think they're popular because they're popular. It's like I very early on decided that I am not raising my kids on music that is for kids just because a million other people do it for their kids. I'm raising kids on music that I want to listen to by myself in my car. And I recommend it to you, Justin Roberts, and much by Justin Roberts. He's amazing. And They Might Be Giants, who is actually, they're not a kid group. They're an adult group who has been one of my favorites for years. And they just happen to make a couple of fantastic kid albums, again, that I want to listen to in my own car. And this is what I want to share with my kids. I want to share something with my kids that I love. And you know, even like Jim Henson stuff, Muppet stuff, and Sesame Street stuff. Like, there's a lot of good stuff out there that I like myself. That's what I want to raise my kids on. And now it has changed into my younger son, comes with me to a lot of my performances, and especially my social events. And he'll back me up with some songs. And so now I'm raising him on the songs that I actually just like for myself. And he's enjoying a lot of it anyway. He's enjoying it himself as well. I mean, he's like memorized a whole bunch of obscure old Frank Sinatra songs, not just like roughly, but you see him precisely pronounce this stuff. It's really wonderful. So it's like, you know, who's deciding this value? Who's deciding the value of that kids group, of that group that just does it for kids, and they're very popular, but they're not popular among adults. They're only popular among children. Yeah. Who's deciding that group is popular, as opposed to, you know, I'm choosing music for myself. I'm choosing music for my kids because I love it, in a sense. You know, I think among all the music that I love, I think this is the most kid friendly, and so I'm going to share that with them.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, our kids listen to a band which is called Deine Freunde in German, your friends. And they make children's music, but it's so good that even the adults listening to the music, they smile, and they understand that, they understand the vibe. It's a bit like The Simpsons, where everybody is laughing with The Simpsons, but some of the jokes are more for adults.
Right, different wavelengths, but yeah.
So some of these bands, they are so good that they can actually do that, and that's great. And I'm not sure that they are well known in Germany. I don't think so, but yeah, I mean, they should be. But you are right. I mean, within the digital age, it's all about clicks and algorithms. And once people have clicked a million times on some album, then it's going to go to the top, and this will just mean that it will be kept at the top forever, even though the music is not so good. But yeah, we let algorithms determine these things. So yeah, that would be. I think that would create another discussion and debate.
Yeah, and it's about, like, you know, Stephanie Kelton is a great communicator. She can communicate with economists, and she can communicate with the public at the same time. Like The Deficit Myth is a book that communicates complicated things to the public. And Pixar movies, some of the, you know, good Pixar movies, are very appealing to children and adults at the same time. And, you know, some of the humor happens to cross over to both, but a lot of it is just on different wavelengths. But these movies can communicate to different audiences at the same time. So anyway, okay, all right, Dirk, thanks. It was really nice spending time with you. Thank you.
Yeah, it was nice talking to you, Jeff. So
yeah. And I look forward to hearing more about the development of the 2026 book. And well, actually, just spend just a brief moment. You're teaching a Torrance course. What is the other course that you're teaching?
I teach professional economic writing, and I do lectures on finance, if I'm not mistaken, next year.
But the only one at Torrance is the equality course?
No, all these three are on Torrance, and I teach also at Steinbeis University here in Germany. where I do a course which is called Economics, Politics, and Society,
Okay.
which gives students an overview about different kind of economic theories that matter mostly to students working in companies.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you, Dirk. Thank you for spending this time with me. This was really nice, and maybe we could do it again sometime.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.